He came home expecting silence, routine, and the cold discipline of another unfinished day. Instead, he found his mother outside, kneeling in the snow, breath shallow, hands shaking. Beside her, a small puppy was tied near the shed, pressing his trembling body against her for warmth. The house was warm. The lights were on. But both had been left in the cold. He dropped everything, lifted his mother into his arms, and carried her inside. Then returned for the puppy. His K9 dog stood still, guarding them both, as if this moment had already been written. Where are you watching from today? Like the video and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends for stories that refuse to stay silent. The truck engine ticked as it cooled, the sound sharp and lonely in the frozen air. Caleb Vance sat behind the wheel for a moment longer than necessary, both hands resting lightly at 10 and 2, the way they always did when he needed to feel steady. Snow drifted across the windshield in thin, restless sheets, catching the glow of the porch light ahead. The house looked exactly as it should, neat, symmetrical, quietly waiting. And yet, something in his chest tightened. Caleb was 28, tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man who spent most of his days behind a desk but never stopped training his body for violence he hoped never to need again. His movements were economical, deliberate. A faint scar cut across the upper curve of his left shoulder, hidden now beneath layers of winter fabric, a reminder of a night overseas when things had gone wrong faster than words could keep up. His face was clean-shaven, angular, American in a way that felt carved rather than styled. Dark, brown hair, clipped into a precise undercut, sat neatly beneath a knit cap. His eyes, blue-gray and habitually observant, reflected the porch light without softening. Beside him in the passenger seat, Kestrel stirred. The German shepherd was all quiet muscle and intense stillness. His black and tan coat was short, dense, built for cold. 6 years old, trained K9, he didn't fidget or whine the way other dogs might after a long drive. He lifted his head once, ears angling forward, eyes narrowing as he studied the house. Caleb noticed. "You feel it too," he murmured, not quite a question. Kestrel did not respond. He rarely did. His job wasn't to reassure, it was to assess. Caleb stepped out into the snow, boots crunching against ice-hard gravel. The cold bit at his jaw immediately, sharp and familiar. He liked the cold. It kept things honest. No room for pretending when the air itself demanded attention. The house sat in a quiet subdivision tucked into the northern edge of the state, where winters were long and neighbors kept their distances. Homeowners Association rules were posted neatly at the entrance, promising order, consistency, and safety. On the surface, it was the kind of place people trusted. Caleb unlocked the front door. Warm air met him, dry and faintly chemical. Lemon cleaner, too strong. He paused just inside the threshold. The living room lights were off. No television hum, no soft clutter of sound. His boots echoed more than they should have on the hardwood floor. "Kestrel, stay," he said softly. The dog obeyed, though his body remained tense, weight forward. "Mom?" Caleb called. His voice was low, careful. He pictured Evelyn the way she'd looked the last time he left, wrapped in her old beige cardigan, silver hair tucked back loosely, hands folded in her lap as if she were always bracing against something invisible. She was nearly 70 now, smaller than she used to be, but still possessed of a quiet resilience that had raised him through lean years and long absences. No answer came. Caleb moved deeper into the house, eyes cataloging details automatically. The throw blanket on the couch was folded with unnatural precision, its edges aligned too perfectly. The coffee table was clear. Not a magazine, not a mug, No sign that anyone had actually lived here today. In the kitchen, the counters gleamed under the low light. The sink was empty. Too empty. His mother liked to leave a cup drying near the window, said it reminded her that something had been warm recently. "Kestrel," Caleb called again, quieter now. The dog stepped inside, nails clicking softly. Halfway down the hall, he stopped. His posture changed in an instant. Kestrel's body went rigid, head lifting, nostrils flaring in short, precise breaths. The fur along his shoulders rose slowly, not in fear, but in recognition. His gaze fixed on the back of the house, toward the sliding glass door that led into the yard. Caleb felt the shift like a pressure drop. "What is it?" he whispered. Kestrel took one measured step forward, then froze. The silence thickened. Caleb followed, every instinct tightening into focus. The glass door was fogged with cold, the world beyond blurred and pale. He wiped a circle clear with his sleeve. The backyard lay under a thin blanket of snow, a leaning fence, bare shrubs clawing at the ground, and in the far corner, half hidden by drifting white, stood the small garden shed. Its door was shut. Something moved inside. Caleb's breath caught. Before he could react, a voice came from behind him. "You're home early." He turned. Blair stood in the doorway to the kitchen, perfectly framed, as if she'd been placed there intentionally. She was tall and slender, posture immaculate. Her dark blonde hair was pulled into a smooth ponytail, not a strand out of place. Her skin was pale, unblemished, the kind that never seemed to chap or crack no matter how cold the weather grew. She wore fitted leggings and a cream-colored sweater that looked expensive in a way that felt distant, chosen more to be seen than to be worn. Her expression was composed, pleasant even, but there was no surprise in her eyes. "You didn't call," she added. Caleb studied her face. He'd once admired how calm she always seemed, how little rattled her. Lately, that calm felt more like a closed door. "Where's my mother?" he asked. Blair sighed softly, crossing her arms. "She's resting." "Where?" "In the back," she said, nodding vaguely toward the yard. "She likes the air. It helps her breathing." Kestrel let out a low sound, deep in his chest. Not a growl, a warning. Blair's gaze flicked to the dog, irritation flashing for just a moment before it smoothed away. "Control him." "He's not misbehaving," Caleb said evenly. "He's alert." Blair's lips tightened. "You're overthinking this. The house was getting cluttered. Your mother makes messes without realizing it." Caleb said nothing. Silence was often more revealing than argument. He turned back to the glass door. The movement in the shed came again, smaller this time, trembling. A chill crawled up his spine, sharper than the cold outside. That was when Kestrel did something strange. Instead of rushing forward, instead of barking or scratching at the glass, he sat, perfectly still. His ears were forward. His eyes never left the shed. His body vibrated with restraint like a coiled wire held back by will alone. Caleb had seen that posture before, on rooftops overseas, outside doors rigged to explode, in moments when time itself seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't curiosity. This was a threshold. Caleb reached for the door handle, his fingers brushing cold metal. Behind him, Blair spoke again, sharper now. "Caleb, don't make this into something it isn't." He didn't turn. "Mom," he called one last time, louder now. From somewhere beyond the glass, faint and fragile, a sound answered. Not a word, a breath. Caleb opened the door. Cold air rushed in, raw and unforgiving, carrying with it the truth he hadn't wanted to name yet. And behind him, Kestrel rose in one smooth motion, ready, not to attack, but to protect. The house, so clean and quiet moments before, felt suddenly like it had been holding its breath. And now, finally, it was exhaling. The cold struck like a blade the moment the door slid open. Caleb stepped out first, boots sinking into snow that looked softer than it was. The night air wrapped around him, sharp and merciless, carrying the smell of ice and old wood. The backyard lights were off. Everything beyond the porch glow dissolved into shadow and white. Then he saw her. Evelyn was crouched near the shed, her body folded inward as if she were trying to disappear into herself. She wore a thin coat that had once been beige but now looked gray with age and snow. Her silver hair spilled loose from beneath a knit cap, strands frozen stiff against her cheeks. One hand was braced against the ground, trembling so hard it barely held her up. Beside her, tied to a short rope near the shed door, was the puppy. He was very young, no more than 3 months old. A German shepherd pup, black and tan like Kestrel, but softer. His coat still fuzzy in that way puppies hadn't yet outgrown. His ears hadn't decided whether they wanted to stand or fold. One tipping forward, the other half flopped. His ribs showed faintly beneath his fur. His dark eyes were muscle, unfocused, glazed with cold and fear. He made a small sound when Caleb stepped closer. Not a bark, not even a whine. Just a breathy, broken noise that barely rose above the wind. Caleb's chest tightened. "Mom," he said, dropping to one knee in the snow. Evelyn lifted her head a fraction. Her eyes, pale and tired, struggled to focus. When they finally found him, something fragile passed across her face. Relief, yes, but also fear, as if she wasn't certain he was real. "Caleb," she whispered. The word came out thin, scraped raw by the cold. Behind him, Kestrel exploded into motion, not toward attack, toward life. The German shepherd crossed the yard in long, controlled strides, snow spraying from his paws. He slowed as he reached the pair, lowering his head first to the puppy, nose brushing gently along the small body. Alive, breathing. Then he shifted, pressing his broad, warm flank against Evelyn's side, angling his body so the wind hit him instead of her. His tail stayed low, still. His focus never wavered. Caleb moved on instinct. He shrugged off his outer jacket and wrapped it around his mother's shoulders, pulling her closer to him. "You're inside now," he said, voice firm but gentle. "I've got you." Evelyn's hands clutched weakly at his sleeve. They were shockingly cold. The puppy trembled harder, the rope at his neck pulling tight as he tried to inch closer. Caleb's jaw set. He reached for the knot, fingers stiff and clumsy in the cold. But before he could finish, Kestrel nudged the rope aside with careful precision, holding it steady with his paw, as if he understood exactly what needed to happen. The knot came loose. The rope fell slack. The puppy collapsed against Kestrel's leg, pressing his small body into the larger dog as if instinct alone told him this was safety. Kestrel stood firm, allowing the weight, absorbing the cold, his presence a wall. Caleb scooped Evelyn into his arms with practiced care. She weighed far less than she should have. That realization hurt more than the cold. Inside the house, warmth hit them all at once. Almost too much. Too fast. The contrast made Caleb dizzy for a second as he carried his mother into the living room and laid her gently on the couch. The puppy stumbled after them, guided by Kestrel, paws slipping on the rug before he curled instinctively against Evelyn's side, pressing his nose into the fabric of her coat. Caleb grabbed blankets, one after another, layering them over his mother's shoulders and legs. His hands shook now, adrenaline bleeding into something closer to anger. Blair stood near the kitchen entrance, arms crossed. Up close, the contrast between her and the scene was jarring. She was immaculate. Not a crease in her sweater, not a strand of hair out of place. Her expression held no panic, no shock, only irritation, as if the situation were an inconvenience that had disrupted her evening. "What is all this?" she asked. Caleb straightened slowly. "What happened?" he replied. "Why was my mother outside?" Blair exhaled through her nose, a quiet sound of restrained patience. "She wandered out again. I told you her memory's getting worse." Evelyn shifted under the blankets, her shoulders curling inward at the sound of Blair's voice. "She was in the snow," Caleb said, "with a puppy." "She likes the air," Blair answered quickly. "Fresh air is good for her. Doctors say that." Kestrel lifted his head. He did not growl, he did not bare his teeth. He simply stood and moved. One step forward, then another, until his body was squarely between Blair and the couch. The room seemed to tighten around that small, deliberate act. Blair's eyes flicked to the dog, annoyance flashing across her face. "Control your animal." "He's not an animal," Caleb said quietly. "He's trained, and he's doing his job." Blair's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're making this dramatic. It was temporary." "Temporary doesn't mean safe," Caleb replied. The puppy whimpered softly, pressing closer to Evelyn's side. She lifted a trembling hand and rested it on his back, her fingers barely moving. "Please," she whispered. It wasn't clear who the word was meant for. Caleb noticed then how the house smelled, not of food or warmth, but of cleaner. Bleach and lemon. The air stung faintly in his nose. Too clean. He guided his mother through small sips of water, watching the way her hands shook around the glass. Her lips were pale, cracked. Blair watched all of it with a tight, controlled calm. "You should have called," she said again, "coming home like this, causing a scene." Caleb met her gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kestrel did something unexpected. He sat. Not by Caleb, not by Evelyn, but facing the hallway. His ears angled forward, his posture locked, as if listening for something that hadn't happened yet. The moment stretched. Caleb felt it. A subtle pull in his chest, the same sensation he'd learned to trust overseas when things didn't line up the way they should. When silence carried weight. He didn't know why. But he knew this wasn't over. He helped his mother settle deeper into the blankets, then straightened and scanned the room again. His eyes caught on small details he'd ignored at first. The absence of his mother's shoes by the door, the way her pill bottles sat untouched on the counter, labels turned neatly outward. A faint red mark around her wrist, as if she'd been gripping something too hard for too long. Caleb said nothing. He crouched beside Kestrel instead, resting a hand briefly against the dog's shoulder. Solid. Grounded. "Good," he murmured. Kestrel did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed down the hall, unblinking. The puppy let out a small sigh and fell into an uneasy sleep against Evelyn's side. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling against the windows. Inside, the truth had taken its first breath. And Caleb Vance, Navy SEAL, understood one thing with growing clarity. Whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. Morning came without warmth. The light that slipped through the windows was thin and colorless, as if the sun itself were reluctant to be there. Snow had settled into every edge of the neighborhood overnight, smoothing corners, muting sound. The world looked calm in the way only dangerous things sometimes did. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat at the small kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling untouched between his hands. His shoulders were squared, posture straight out of habit. But there was a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there the night before. Across the room, Evelyn slept on the couch beneath layers of blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. Milo lay curled against her side, his small body rising and falling too quickly, as if he hadn't yet learned that warmth could last. Kestrel was awake. The German shepherd lay on the floor near the hallway, head lifted, ears angled forward. He hadn't moved much since dawn. He watched the house the way he once watched. Unfamiliar buildings overseas, patient, alert, measuring. Caleb stood and began to walk. Not aimlessly, methodically. He started with his mother's room. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the space felt wrong in ways that were hard to name at first. The bed was made too tightly, the sheets pulled flat as if no one had slept there. Evelyn's dresser was cleared of its usual clutter. No framed photos, no half-used hand lotion, no loose hairpins. Her shoes were gone, not misplaced, removed. Caleb opened the closet. Her coats hung neatly to one side, pressed together, as though they had been edited rather than stored. He checked the nightstand drawer. Empty. His eyes moved quickly now, cataloging absence as much as presence. In the bathroom, her toothbrush was dry. In the medicine cabinet, her prescriptions sat untouched. Full bottles with refill dates long past when they should have been light. Caleb exhaled slowly. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was arrangement. He moved through the rest of the house the same way. The laundry room smelled sharply of bleach. Too sharply. A thin mattress lay folded behind the washer, its edges uneven. The fabric creased as if someone had slept there more than once. Beside it sat a plastic bowl and an old chipped mug he recognized immediately. It had been his mother's. Something tightened in his chest. Behind him, Kestrel's nails clicked softly on the floor. The dog paused at the threshold, refusing to enter the room. His body language was clear. This was not a place of rest. Caleb straightened and continued. In the living room, his eyes finally caught on what he'd missed the night before. A small security camera mounted high in the corner near the ceiling. He hadn't installed it. It was angled inward, not toward the front door, not toward the yard, but toward the couch, toward the hallway, toward the space where Evelyn spent most of her days. Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then reached up and gently adjusted the lens downward. It resisted slightly before moving. From the couch, Evelyn stirred. Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then found him. Relief crossed her face, but it was chased quickly by something else. Fear. Habitual. Learned. "It's okay," Caleb said softly, kneeling beside her. "I just want to understand." Her fingers twisted in the blanket. "She doesn't like things moved," Evelyn whispered. "Who?" Evelyn glanced toward the hallway, then away. She didn't answer. Caleb nodded once, accepting the silence for what it was. He stood, his decision already forming. Not emotional, not impulsive, but weighed. Outside, the neighborhood looked as it always did. Tidy driveways, shoveled sidewalks, flags hanging stiff in the cold. People waved politely, but didn't stop. Privacy was currency here. Problems stayed indoors. Caleb walked next door first. The man who answered introduced himself as Tom Riker, early 50s, broad-shouldered with a graying beard, and hands permanently marked by outdoor work. He wore a flannel shirt under a heavy coat, eyes cautious but not unkind. "Everything okay?" Tom asked. Caleb hesitated, choosing his words carefully. My mother's health hasn't been great. I wanted to ask if you'd seen her outside much lately. Tom shifted his weight. His gaze flicked briefly toward Caleb's house. I don't get involved in family stuff, he said, not defensively, just practiced. HOA's strict about complaints. Caleb nodded. I understand. The next house, then the next. Different faces, same answers. A woman named Helen Moore, late 60s with short silver hair and sharp eyes softened by age, paused longer than the others. She held her coat closed with both hands, studying Caleb as if weighing something. She's kind, Helen said finally. Your mother. Caleb waited. Helen sighed. That's all I'll say. When Caleb returned home, the sun was already dipping low. He stood in the driveway for a moment, breath fogging, watching the sky darken. Blair was inside, moving through the kitchen with clipped efficiency. She didn't look at him when he entered. I'm heading out again tonight, Caleb said evenly. Her hand paused on the counter. Already? I need to check something, he replied. Not a lie, just incomplete. Blair turned then, her expression smooth, but tight around the eyes. You're being paranoid. Everything's under control. Caleb met her gaze. That's what worries me. He packed light, just enough to stay gone a few hours. Before leaving, he knelt beside his mother, adjusting the blankets around her shoulders. I'll be back before morning, he said. Evelyn's eyes searched his face. Don't stay away too long. I won't. Kestrel rose immediately when Caleb reached for his coat. No, Caleb said softly. Stay. The dog hesitated, muscles taut. Guard, Caleb added. Kestrel obeyed, settling near the couch, his body angled protectively toward Evelyn and Milo. Caleb drove out of the neighborhood and parked a few streets away, engine off, watching from a distance. The cold deepened faster than forecast. His phone buzzed with a weather alert. Temperatures dropping lower than expected overnight. Caleb frowned. He checked the time, considered turning back, then stopped himself. No alarms, no sounds, no visible movement. His mother was inside, warm, watched over by Kestrel. He had no concrete evidence, only unease. He stayed. The night stretched on, and the temperature kept falling. Sometime after midnight, Caleb glanced back toward the house and felt his breath catch. A faint light flickered on in the backyard. Not the porch, the shed. It glowed weakly through the snow, then went dark again. Caleb sat up straighter, heart beginning to pound. Not with fear, but with recognition. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. He drove back faster than he should have. By the time he reached the street, the wind had picked up, snow slicing sideways. The house stood dark and still, as if nothing had changed. Inside, Evelyn slept fitfully, her breathing uneven. Milo shivered in his sleep, paws twitching. Kestrel was on his feet, not pacing, waiting. Caleb hung up his coat and scanned the room. Everything looked the same, too ordered. He knelt and rested his forehead briefly against his hands. This was the mistake. Not leaving, but trusting silence. He had believed discipline would protect them, that patience was strength, that waiting for certainty was wisdom. Instead, it had cost warmth. It had cost time. Caleb stood and walked to the window, staring out into the storm-dark yard. The shed sat barely visible beneath drifting snow. Whatever was happening, it wasn't finished. And the weight of that realization settled heavily in his chest. Not as panic, but as guilt. A quiet, steady guilt that would not be ignored. The storm arrived without warning, the way the most dangerous things often did. Snow slammed sideways against the windows, driven by wind that howled like something alive. The neighborhood lights flickered once, twice, then went dark, plunging the street into a white, churning blur. The quiet order that the Homeowners Association prized so fiercely vanished under the weight of weather that did not care about rules. Caleb was already moving. He pulled on a heavy jacket, boots thudding across the floor as he crossed to the garage. His training took over, smooth and efficient. The backup generator sat where he'd checked it earlier, fuel canisters sealed, cords coiled and ready. He opened the garage door just enough to let in a blast of snow-laced air and stepped inside, shoulders hunched against the cold. The wind tore at the open seam, snow scattering across the concrete floor. Caleb reached for the generator's handle and froze. The door that connected the garage to the house was shut, locked. He frowned and tried the handle. It didn't budge. "Blair?" he called, raising his voice over the wind. No answer. He knocked once, harder the second time. Still nothing. A slow, cold understanding settled into his chest. Inside the house, Blair stood by the thermostat, her face pale but composed. She wrapped her arms around herself, less from cold than from a sense of rigid purpose. To her, this wasn't cruelty. It was order. Boundaries. Control. Caleb was impulsive, emotional. He disrupted the structure she had built. This storm, she believed, would force him to stop interfering. She turned away from the door. In the living room, the temperature was already dropping. The heater was silent. The air felt brittle, sharp in the lungs. Evelyn lay curled beneath blankets, her body shaking uncontrollably now. The cold seeped into her joints, making every movement an act of pain. Her fingers were numb, stiff as she tried to pull the blanket higher. Beside her, Milo whimpered. The puppy was still tethered. Someone had retied the thin rope to a table leg when Caleb wasn't looking. The cold had tightened it, fibers contracting, drawing the loop closer around Milo's small neck. Each breath made the rope shift, pressing tighter. Evelyn noticed. "Milo," she whispered. Her hands trembled violently as she reached for the rope. Her fingers didn't work the way she wanted them to. Arthritis flared sharp and sudden, a white-hot pain in her wrists. She tried again. The knot wouldn't loosen. Milo whimpered louder now, his small body pressing closer to her instinctively, trusting her in a way that hurt almost as much as the cold. His ears flattened. His breaths came quick and shallow. Evelyn pulled him closer, wrapping her thin arms around his trembling form, using her own body as a shield. She pressed her cheek against his head, whispering words he barely understood, but felt all the same. "It's all right," she murmured, teeth chattering. "You're not alone." Across the room, Kestrel stood. He had been still for hours, conserving energy, listening to the house the way a soldier listened to terrain. The drop in temperature registered instantly. The shift in Evelyn's breathing, the tightening of Milo's movements. This was no longer observation. This was survival. Kestrel moved with purpose, positioning himself so his body blocked the worst of the cold air seeping from the windows. He pressed his flank against Evelyn's side, radiating warmth, steady and grounding. He did not bark. He did not scratch at the door. Instead, he lifted his head and let out a long, low sound. A howl. It cut through the storm, not panicked, not frantic, but measured and deliberate. The sound carried, slicing through wind and snow with eerie clarity. Again and again, each note steady, intentional. Outside, the sound reached the neighboring houses. Across the street, Tom Riker looked up from his darkened living room, confusion flickering across his weathered face. The howl reached him through the storm, raising the hair on his arms. "That's not normal," he muttered. Next door, Helen Moore stood by her window, heart pounding as she listened. The sound wasn't fear, it was warning. She reached for her phone. Lights began to flicker on, one by one, despite the outage. Motion-activated cameras clicked to life, small red dots piercing the darkness. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. The silence the neighborhood had maintained for years, carefully, politely, finally shattered. Inside the house, as Kestrel's howl rose again, Evelyn felt something shift. Not the cold, not the pain, something deeper. She tightened her grip on Milo and looked toward the hallway, her cloudy eyes suddenly clear with purpose. "This is wrong," she whispered, not to the dog, but to herself. And for the first time since the storm began, she stopped enduring and began deciding. In the garage, Caleb rammed his shoulder into the door. Once, twice. The third time, the frame cracked, splintering under the force. The door burst inward, wood snapping as Caleb stumbled through, breath ragged. He didn't stop. The cold hit him immediately as he ran inside, eyes snapping to the living room. "Mom!" Evelyn lifted her head weakly. Relief flooded her face, followed by tears she didn't have the strength to stop. Caleb crossed the room in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands went straight to Milo's collar, fingers working the rope loose with practiced precision. "It's okay," he said, voice low and fierce. "I've got you." The rope fell away. Milo collapsed against Evelyn, gasping softly as the pressure eased. Caleb wrapped both of them in blankets, pulling them close, shielding them with his own body. Behind him, Blair stood frozen near the hallway. Her calm finally cracked. "This isn't what it looks like," she said sharply. "I was maintaining order. You don't understand." Caleb turned. The look in his eyes stopped her mid-sentence. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, clearer. "You locked me out," he said quietly. "In a blizzard." Kestrel stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Blair and Evelyn, his body rigid, eyes fixed. He did not bare his teeth. He didn't need to. Outside, headlights cut through the snow as neighbors gathered, phones raised, voices overlapping in alarm. Someone shouted Caleb's name. Someone else called emergency services. The house was no longer sealed, no longer private. Caleb pulled his mother closer, resting his forehead briefly against hers. Guilt pressed down on him, heavy, undeniable. This was the cost of discipline without listening, of silence mistaken for strength. He lifted his head, resolve settling in where doubt had been. Whatever happened next, he would not look away again. The storm raged on outside. Inside, something had finally broken. And it wasn't Evelyn. The shelter was warm, but Caleb couldn't feel it. The temporary emergency center, set up in a local school gym, buzzed with low voices and the hum of generators. Folding cots lined the walls. Blankets, donated coats, and thermoses of coffee filled long tables. Outside, the storm still raged. But here, people breathed again. Evelyn lay resting on a cot near the far wall, bundled in layers. Color had begun to return to her cheeks, though exhaustion sat deep in her bones. Milo slept curled against her ribs, his small chest rising steadily now, a faint bandage visible beneath his collar where the rope had burned his skin. Kestrel remained on watch at the foot of the cot, upright and immovable, He had not closed his eyes once since they arrived. Caleb sat nearby, hands clasped, elbows on his knees. His jaw worked slowly as he replayed the night in his mind, not once, but 100 times, each detail clicking into place with brutal clarity. Morning came late, gray and reluctant. By mid-morning, the police arrived. 2 officers entered the gym together. The first was Deputy Aaron Hale, mid-40s, tall with a weathered face and tired eyes. His uniform was worn but clean, the posture of someone who'd learned patience the hard way. The second, Officer Lucas Perez, younger, sharper around the edges, his short beard neatly trimmed, eyes alert and quick. They approached Caleb with calm professionalism. "Mr. Vance," Hale said, offering a nod, "we need to ask you a few questions." Caleb rose smoothly. "Of course." They moved to a quieter corner. Hale listened more than he spoke, occasionally jotting notes. Perez scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Evelyn, on Milo, on Kestrel. "You're saying the interior door was locked from the inside," Perez clarified. "Yes," Caleb replied, "and the heat was off." Hale frowned slightly. "We can't determine intent yet." "I understand," Caleb said, "but there's evidence." Hale exchanged a glance with Perez. "We've been told some footage exists." Caleb nodded. "Neighbors, cameras." Hale exhaled. "The HOA's already raised concerns. Claims of privacy violations." Caleb felt a familiar frustration rise, but he kept his voice even. "Privacy doesn't override endangerment." Later that morning, Evelyn was transported to the hospital for evaluation. Caleb rode in the back of the ambulance with her, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of sleep. Milo was transferred separately to a veterinary clinic, Kestrel riding beside the carrier, eyes never leaving the pup. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and warmth. Dr. Hannah Brooks, the attending veterinarian, met them at the door. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean, auburn hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. Her eyes were kind, but sharp, the gaze of someone used to speaking for those who couldn't. She examined Milo carefully, documenting every mark, every tremor. "This isn't incidental exposure," she said quietly. "The rope constriction worsened with cold contraction. He was at risk of hypoxia." Caleb nodded. "Can you put that in writing?" Dr. Brooks met his eyes. "Already done." At the hospital, Evelyn underwent a full evaluation. Hypothermia, early-stage frostbite on her fingers, elevated stress markers. A physician noted inconsistencies between her medical needs and the environment she'd been kept in. By afternoon, evidence began to stack. Footage from 3 neighbors' cameras captured different angles of the night. The storm, the lights, the sound. One clip showed the shed faintly illuminated. Another caught Kestrel's howl, clear, steady, unmistakable, time-stamped and synchronized with a temperature drop well below forecast. Yet one video mattered more than the rest. It came from Helen Moore's front camera, angled just wide enough to catch Caleb forcing the garage door open. And the moment afterward, when he emerged carrying Evelyn, Milo pressed against her chest. The HOA attempted to block it. "Private residence," their representative argued. "Unauthorized surveillance." The footage nearly disappeared into procedural limbo. Then Dr. Brooks stepped forward. She requested the audio layer of the video and aligned it with Milo's medical chart. "Here," she said, pointing to a timestamp. "This is the sound of prolonged distress vocalization from a working K9. The room fell silent. "That sound," she continued, "correlates precisely with a temperature drop that would exacerbate constriction injuries in young animals. It establishes time, environment, and physiological response. She looked directly at the officials. This isn't voyeurism. It's evidence. The video stayed. The shift was subtle, but real. Hale returned that evening, his expression changed. Less neutral, more resolved. "We're escalating this," he told Caleb. "County level." "Charges?" Caleb asked. "Investigation," Hale corrected. "But yes, this no longer stays local." Caleb exhaled slowly. Community members began to speak. Tom Riker provided a statement. Helen Moore did the same. Others followed, reluctantly at first, then with growing conviction. The collective silence that had protected order over people cracked wide open. Blair did not return calls. Her attorney did. By nightfall, Evelyn slept safely in a hospital bed, Milo monitored and stable, Kestrel stationed outside the room like a sentry. Caleb stood by the window, watching snow fall softly now, as if the storm had spent its rage. Justice hadn't arrived, but it had begun moving, and this time, it wasn't alone. The investigators arrived before noon, quietly and without ceremony. They did not wear the hurried urgency of first responders or the polite restraint of local officers. Their presence was measured, deliberate. People accustomed to entering rooms where narratives were already formed and dismantling them piece by piece. Special investigator Marissa Cole led them. She was in her early 40s, tall and angular, with ash blonde hair cut straight to her shoulders and eyes the color of steel washed clean by rain. Her posture was calm, almost spare, as if emotion were something she stored carefully and used only when necessary. Years in protective services had given her a way of listening that made people feel heard and examined at the same time. Beside her stood analyst Jonah Reed, mid-30s, lean, with dark curls perpetually falling into his eyes. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and spoke little, fingers moving constantly across a tablet as if translating human behavior into patterns and probabilities. They met Caleb in a small conference room at the hospital. "We're here because this case crossed thresholds," Cole said evenly. "Medical, environmental, animal welfare, and domestic control." Caleb nodded. "I want my mother safe." Cole studied his face, not suspiciously, but thoroughly. "So do we." Blair arrived later that afternoon, escorted by her attorney. She looked composed, impeccable. A tailored coat draped over her slender frame, dark hair smoothed back into a low knot. Her skin was pale but flawless, her expression restrained to the point of appearing serene. Control had always suited her. They seated her across from Cole. Caleb remained in the room at Evelyn's request, standing near the window, hands folded loosely in front of him. Blair spoke first. "I maintain structure," she said calmly. "That's all. Structure keeps people safe." Cole inclined her head. "Tell me what safety means to you." Blair didn't hesitate. "Predictability, clean environments, clear authority." "And Evelyn?" Cole asked. "She disrupts routine," Blair replied. "And the dogs, especially the new one, they trigger emotional regression in Caleb." That caught Caleb's attention. Cole leaned forward slightly. Regression to what? Blair's eyes flicked toward Caleb for the first time. To who he was before he learned discipline, before service gave him clarity. Silence settled thickly. Jonah Reed tapped something into his tablet. "So," Cole said gently, "you were afraid of losing him." Blair's jaw tightened. "I was afraid of chaos." "Fear," Cole corrected, "often wears the mask of order." Blair straightened. "You're misunderstanding me." Cole slid a folder across the table. Inside were transcripts, timestamps, still images, patterns emerging where Blair insisted there were none. You adjusted the thermostat during critical weather windows, Cole said. You installed surveillance directed at Evelyn's daily movements. You restricted access to medication and personal items. They were precautions, Blair insisted. They were controls, Cole replied. As the conversation paused, Kestrel, waiting outside the conference room, rose abruptly. His ears went rigid. His body angled toward the hallway. Caleb felt it instantly, that familiar tightening in his chest. A nurse passed by, pushing a cart. Nothing unusual. And yet, Kestrel did not relax. Cole noticed. Your dog does that often? When something's wrong, Caleb said quietly. Cole watched Kestrel through the glass, thoughtful. Animals don't understand narratives, she said. Only conditions. The interview resumed with Evelyn's testimony. She spoke slowly, her voice thin but steady. Her silver hair framed a face worn by years and cold. But her eyes were clear now, resolute. She told me it was for my own good, Evelyn said. That I was safer when I stayed out of the way. Blair's lips pressed together. She said warmth made me weak, Evelyn continued. That dogs made me forget my place. Cole listened without interruption. Did you believe her? Cole asked. Evelyn shook her head faintly. I believed my son would come back. Caleb swallowed hard. Jonah Reed projected a timeline onto the screen. Temperature drops aligned with surveillance activity, audio markers from Kestrel's howls, medical indicators from both Evelyn and Milo. This establishes sustained endangerment, Jonah said. Not neglect. Control under environmental coercion. Blair's composure finally fractured. You're turning discipline into abuse, she snapped. You're rewarding weakness. Cole's voice remained calm. No. We're removing coercion. The decision came swiftly. A temporary protective order was issued that afternoon. Blair was barred from unsupervised contact with Evelyn and prohibited from returning to the residence pending further proceedings. She stood as the ruling was delivered, eyes blazing with disbelief. You're taking everything, she said softly. No, Cole replied. We're stopping you from taking more. Security escorted Blair out. She did not look back. Caleb did not follow. He returned to Evelyn's room, where afternoon light spilled gently across white sheets. Milo lay curled near her hip, bandage clean, tail twitching in sleep. Kestrel stood nearby, finally relaxed enough to sit. Caleb pulled a chair close and sat. Evelyn reached for his hand. Her grip was weak, but certain. You didn't fight her, she said. There was nothing to fight, Caleb answered. Only something to end. He looked at Kestrel, who met his gaze with quiet understanding. The war had never been loud. It had been measured, silent, almost invisible. And it had ended not with victory, but with boundaries restored. Outside the window, the snow began to fall again, softer this time. Caleb stayed where he was. He had learned the difference between discipline and devotion, between order and care, and he would not confuse them again. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, longer mornings, thinner frost on the windows, light that lingered just a little more each day. Snow still covered the ground in places, packed hard and gray, but it no longer ruled everything it touched. The shed was the first thing to go. Caleb stood at a distance as workers dismantled it piece by piece. The structure had always looked harmless, aged wood, a sagging roof, tools hung with careless familiarity. Now, stripped down to beams and then to nothing, it revealed what it had been all along. A place where silence had been made useful. The ground beneath it was filled in, packed down until there was no sign it had ever stood there. Caleb watched until the last plank was hauled away. then turned and walked back toward the house without comment. Inside, the air felt different. Not cleaner, not brighter, just honest. Evelyn spent most of her mornings by the window now, seated in a sturdy chair with a blanket across her knees. Sunlight reached her there, soft and pale, warming her hands as she rested them on the armrests. Her recovery was slow. No dramatic turning points, no sudden strength returning, but it was steady. She no longer flinched at every sound. She no longer folded in on herself when footsteps approached. Some days she spoke little, simply watching the world outside. Other days she told Caleb small stories, things he'd never heard, moments she'd never thought worth sharing before. Her voice carried less fear now, more presence. Milo slept nearby. The puppy had grown quickly, his once awkward limbs beginning to settle into something sturdier. His coat had thickened, the black and tan colors deepening as health returned. He slept hard, truly slept, curled on his side, belly rising and falling in deep, even breaths. No twitching, no startled awakenings. Just rest. Kestrel lay stretched out on the floor for the first time Caleb could remember. Not alert, not angled, not listening. His head rested on his paws, eyes closed, body loose in a way that spoke of trust rather than readiness. The weight he carried, years of vigilance, conditioned awareness, had eased enough for him to let go. Caleb noticed it the moment it happened. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, watching his dog breathe. The house locks were changed that afternoon. Caleb worked quietly, methodical as always. New deadbolts, reinforced frames. He didn't explain himself, didn't narrate the process. It wasn't about reclaiming territory or proving a point. It was about finality. Safety restored did not require an audience. The phone rang once while he worked. He let it go to voicemail. When he finished, he sat at the kitchen table, hands resting flat against the surface, and listened to the quiet. Not the tense quiet of before. This one held space. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn spoke without turning from the window. "You can sit down," she said gently. Caleb looked up, surprised. He hadn't realized he'd been standing so long. "You don't have to guard anymore," she added. The words landed softly, but they stayed. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat beside her. For the first time, he believed her. They ate dinner together that night, nothing elaborate. Soup, bread, warm food shared slowly. Milo lingered under the table, occasionally bumping Caleb's leg with his nose, testing boundaries that were no longer sharp. Kestrel remained nearby, relaxed, uninterested in scanning corners. Afterward, Evelyn reached for the phone. Caleb stiffened slightly, not from fear, but habit. She dialed, waited. When he realized she was calling him, his expression softened. "Yes, Mom," he said. Her smile was small but certain. "I just wanted to hear your voice." There was no urgency in it. No apology, no tremor, just connection. "I'm right here," Caleb replied. "I know," she said. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the snow with gold, before slipping behind the trees. The day ended without ceremony, without headlines, without anyone calling it a victory. And that was enough. Later, Caleb stood by the window alone. He thought about discipline, the kind that had saved his life more than once, the kind that taught him to endure, to wait, to obey structure even when emotions screamed otherwise. He understood now where it failed. Discipline without listening became erasure. Order without care became harm. He looked back at the room, at his mother, breathing easily, at a puppy unafraid to sleep, at a dog who finally trusted the world enough to rest. Caleb turned off the light and joined them, not as a protector, not as a soldier, but as a son. The house held its warmth through the night, and nothing needed to be said again. Sometimes God does not intervene with thunder or miracles we can see. Sometimes he sends a warning in quieter forms, a pause, a feeling that won't leave, a loyal animal that refuses to move, a voice inside us that says, something is wrong. In a world that teaches us to stay silent, to mind our own business, to trust systems more than conscience, courage often looks small. It looks like listening. It looks like choosing compassion when control feels easier. This story is not about victory. It is about awareness. About the moment we stop ignoring what we know is wrong. About the lives that are saved not by power, but by attention. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder. Watch closely, listen carefully, and never dismiss the quiet signals placed in your path. Share this story with someone who needs it. Leave a comment to honor those who speak up when silence is safer. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to this channel so more voices can be heard. May God protect you and your loved ones. May he sharpen your instincts, soften your heart, and guide you when the signs are subtle. Thank you for watching.